Appreciate it. All right, I'm joined now by an MSNBC political analyst, my friend Hugh Hewitt. Of course, he has a nationally syndicated radio show, host of Hugh Hewitt on MSNBC. Mr. Hewitt, welcome, sir.
Thank you, Chuck.
You've hosted quite a bit of these lawmakers making this case that there are a lot of questions about the FBI's investigation. Why not wait for the Inspector General to do its job before muddying the waters here as badly as some in the House Republican caucus want to muddy it?
I've talked mostly to senators, Chuck, 11 of them over 2 days on the air, including today Dan Sullivan of Alaska, Cory Gardner of Colorado, Mike Lee of Utah, and Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania. 4 very responsible, all of whom want a dig-deep investigation of the Bureau concerning the text messages. They are all willing to wait and see what it comes up with. But Dan Sullivan was very pointed. He pointed out that the FBI and the DOJ took down Ted Stevens in a very corrupt prosecution a few years back in Alaska, and he has no hesitation to believe that a few bad actors in the Bureau or the DOJ can take it rogue. I personally think the Republicans in the House are over the Nunes report. They ought to lay back, put it out in 2 weeks and see what's in it, but I would not overpromise, and I certainly would continue to say leave Special Counsel Mueller alone.
Yeah.
And Chuck, I'll ask you, it reminds me so much of Spiro Agnew in 1973, where a U.S. attorney investigated him for 11 months, and then all of a sudden one day he resigns because of tax evasion charges and gives up his office in order to avoid prosecution. I don't think you can prosecute the President of the United States. I don't believe it's constitutional to indict him, but I do think Mueller may be working along those lines.
Let me ask you about the attacks on Andrew McCabe, because I feel as if we've crossed a line here that we're never going to get back. Does this mean that anybody who works in government, suddenly everybody in their life contributes to whether they're biased about something? Do you see where we're going here? This is to me what's happened to Andrew McCabe, based on what his wife did, seems to be over the top and a new level of absurdity of this town.
I draw the line that what your spouse does has anything to do with what you do. However, I do think it's appropriate for the President of the United States to ask his senior political appointees in the unitary executive that we have whether or not they can support his agenda and move forward. I don't know what went on in that conversation. We'll find out in the Mueller report. I do think we ought to be all very careful about calling people good hats and bad hats, black hats and white hats, until the end of this thing. I trust Mueller. He's got such a great reputation that what will come out will come out. But I am open to the possibility that there were some very bad actors at the FBI. And I remind you of one name, Mark Felt. He turned out to be a hero to history, but he was a deputy FBI director who was, in fact, deep throat. So the FBI has a history of putting their fingers on the scales sometime, 1 or 2 people at a time. So we just need to be open to what Dan Sullivan said to me today. There needs to be a lot of transparency, a lot of openness at the Bureau.
I'm trying to figure out a time when the FBI made up evidence. Because the implication is what? That they supposedly had a political bias. And by the way, maybe it wasn't even a political bias. It may have just been a personal bias. We don't know what that bias is. A lot of people are trying to draw conclusions here. But go down that road. Nobody's come up with a single piece of evidence that it somehow is somehow coming up with false allegations. Are they making up allegations? The Mark Felt situation, did he make up anything?
The Ted Stevens investigation involved the suppression of exonerating information, and that seems to me to be the closest parallel to what is being alleged as the worst-case scenario for the FBI. Again, we don't know. If they suppress exonerating information about the president, or if the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, which I used to serve as the assistant to Attorney General, preparing the warrants with senior counterintelligence agents at the FBI, if they made that system pervert in order to get a FISA warrant in order to surveil Trump Tower, there's a big problem there if the intelligence community and the Justice Department are misusing Section 702 or other authorities. But we don't know any of that. My appeal to everyone is slow down and wait for Mueller, slow down and wait for the IG. And by the way, I think Rod Rosenstein ought to recuse himself and turn it over to Rachel Brand. So I just think it's a mess at DOJ and FBI, all driven by the fact that the attorney...
But why is it a mess? Is it a mess because you have somebody who's making a concerted effort to muddy the waters? I would ask you this, Hugh. If if the president has nothing to be afraid of, then why isn't he open to an investigation?
He keeps saying he doesn't, and he'll talk to them, and he wants all of his people to talk to him, and he's not concerned about Jeff Sessions talking to them. Don McGahn, you can't let your lawyer talk to him. So I actually think he's pretty relaxed about this whole thing because he doesn't believe there's any collusion.
Have you seen his Twitter feed?
I do, but there is no collusion.
That feed doesn't exactly come across as somebody who isn't concerned about it. If I wasn't concerned about it, I wouldn't be tweeting about it.
Oh, I think he has learned that if you want to change the subject away from anything you don't like, tweet about the Russian investigation. And if you're perfectly confident that there's no collusion, tweet about it a lot. But I'm still open to anything. And I remember Agnew, you're too young, Chuck, coming out of left field. Agnew walked out and resigned. So if they're assembling a case and they walk in and they sit down with the president and they say, here's money laundering, here's family involvement, here's collusion, here's the data company, a lot of things could change overnight. But let's all just wait and see, because these text messages are deeply concerning.
No, I understand
that.
Then
just
why?
Pillow talk.
I agree. So do you think Ron Johnson then shouldn't have come out and gone so public? Because the responsible thing is let the IG do its job, and then Congress can question the IG report?
I think it's fine for senators as the co-equal branch to bring a spotlight to bear on the Bureau and the need perhaps for a second special counsel. I wouldn't discuss any particular one because I don't have a full you've got to lay out every play that's been called for to understand the game plan. Picking and choosing text messages tells me nothing as a former DOJ person. Right. So I thought that was a little intemperate, but we do have a lot of smoke coming out of the Bureau.
Hugh Hewitt, as always, sir, thank you. Glad to have you on.
Thank you, Chuck.
Come back to the East Coast.